where the different vested interests lie in this equation. I mean, I certainly think the government should be putting more money into public service media provisions. I mean, they promised $38 million at the last election, and so far they've only delivered 15 each year, and that's certainly not enough to have a huge impact on the range of public service media that we have in New Zealand. I don't know if the solution, though, is to take money away from TVNZ or to increase the amount of money going to the commercial enterprises. Because what we find is that the opportunity costs faced by commercial broadcasters for making and commissioning and scheduling local content have also gone up. So it's costing more and more to actually insulate programming decisions from commercial pressures, and that's part of the problem here. You know, the real hole in the budget has come from the way in which the digital intermediaries have soaked up the online advertising market.
But isn't that a reality now? Like, you can't rewind time and make Facebook and social media go away. So at some point, do we not just have to accept that as a small country, we just don't have the funding to have two fully functioning television networks producing news?
I would say there's lots of ways that we can come up with funding. In fact, the Better Public Media Group that I work with has come up with several, including, for example, imposing a small levy on the turnover of these big digital intermediaries and pumping that
it's
back
the obvious
into
one, isn't
local
it?
journalism.
And it's a small levy. It's only a small levy being talked about.
Political will to do that, and it seems to be lacking.
Yeah, we've got to leave it there. But Peter, thank you very much for coming on, and you're giving your thoughts. Peter Thompson there, media lecturer at Victoria University in Wellington. A bit around psychometric testing. Julia says, Wallace, the most interesting question I had in the psychometric test was, do you often see parked cars outside your house? Go figure.
That's really good. What's the right answer?
But that would just drive you loony, wouldn't it, if you're sitting there thinking, what am I supposed to say? I mean, sometimes I park my own car.
Julia says, I did feel a bit paranoid answering it. Right. Finally, on a brief note, Joe Nunwick in Metro magazine writes about, it's a good article, this one, what he sees as the spiritual emptiness of pre-packaged meal kits. He says, I have always distrusted these meal boxes and their streamlined, insidious convenience. So he signed on for a free one, found it wasn't his style. What gets me, he says, is the overarching sense of giving up that nightly recipe and bags represent, the nightly dance that you do with cooking your meal. He said it's a kind of decision paralysis.
So what? I think this is complete not... I mean, I'm like him, actually. I go home and cook, and I don't cook from a bag or a box or anything, you know, and I enjoy doing that. But so what? If people are eating real food and it happened to be provided for them with a recipe and they can afford to do that, absolutely fine. They're eating real food, they're doing proper cooking, and they're learning skills and they're developing their repertoire.
But you take...
What's the problem?
Well, it's poor this packaged...
Linda. I mean, I don't use any of them. I don't think any of them even deliver to where I live, which kind of makes it easier for me not to use them. But, you know, you don't actually need a recipe. You can just, like, cook a sausage and mash a spud
you know
and
that.
chuck some peas.
But you know that, and I know that, and that's what you and I do.
But I don't cook recipes. I don't make sauces.
But for people who this stopped eating takeaways so much and meant they're eating more real food, isn't that great? Isn't it just great?
You know what, I mean, these days people use Uber. I mean, if I could live within Uber Eats range, man, every night I'd be having
That's your problem, and I do not believe you.
Yeah. Oh, I'd love it. It'd be great.
Oh, my God, disagreement on the panel
it's terrible being the mum having to cook every night about what you're going to make.
Linda, Simon, thank you very much. See you Monday.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, after almost 2 days on the run, police swoop on the accused Gore gun thief. But another manhunt is underway after an Australian tourist is fatally shot near Raglan. His distraught fiancée escaped after their camper van was taken at gunpoint. The deceit that could cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. State-owned quake insurer Southern Response is exposed for making false and misleading claims in order to pay up. Hong Kong braces for more mass protests at the weekend. And the former Fonterra boss's chunky goodbye cheque. Chicken feet, pet food or not fit for human consumption.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. A Southland man accused of stealing 2 police-issued Glock pistols is in custody. Police confirmed Gore Gemmell was located this afternoon after more than 36 hours on the run. Tess Brunton reports.
The police had been searching for Gore Gemmell, who is 24, since midnight on Wednesday. He is accused of ramming a police car in Gore before stealing a patrol vehicle, ramming another police car and fleeing with the police-issued Glock pistols. The police say Mr Gemmell used keys left in the ignition to open the car's lockbox and remove the firearms, which contained up to 17 9mm rounds each. The Southern District Commander, Superintendent Paul Basham, says more than 50 officers have been involved in the search. Mr Basham will provide an update to media outside the Gore police station shortly. Ko Tess Brunton, tēnei.
Police have launched a homicide inquiry after a 33-year-old Australian man died in a random shooting attack on a camper van near Raglan in the early hours of this morning. A Canadian woman in the van survived, but the body of the Australian man was discovered hours later near Hamilton. Andrew McRae reports.
The police say the Canadian woman managed to escape uninjured and ran some distance through bush to contact police. They say she's shocked and distressed and is being cared for. Detective Inspector Graham Pitkethly says it appears to have been a random attack. He says it's concerning having an armed offender in the area, but police are working hard to identify and locate him. Mr Pitkethly says all officers in Waikato will be armed in the meantime. In Hamilton, ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
Lawyers are warning it won't be easy to completely block letters from prisoners with extremist views. It comes after the man accused of the Christchurch mosque attacks sent 2 letters that corrections say should have been blocked. An expert team has begun checking all letters written by prisoners with extremist views, and corrections staff are advising the minister on possible law changes. The accused gunman's mother told NZME she is worried her only contact with her son will be stopped. But a Wellington barrister, Graham Edgler, says the prisoners will still be able to send letters as long as the letters don't breach rules set out in the Corrections Act. The police say no shots were fired during an arrest near the Pakuranga Mosque this afternoon. A worshipper says at the time he was terrified they were witnessing a repeat of the March 15th terror attacks, and he and his son ran for cover. But other worshippers later told him the police were across the road. A man who works near the mosque describes what he saw.
I just heard 4 loud bangs, went outside to see a white BMW just down the road with police all over some guy that got out and he was limping, and they just put him in the back of a van. They were here for a while.
Inspector Wendy Spiller says police, with assistance from the Armed Defenders Squad, arrested a 40-year-old man, and it was completely unrelated to the mosque. Southern Response has been ordered to pay nearly $179,000 to a family for misleading them over their earthquake-damaged home. The High Court ruling could expose the government insurer to millions of dollars in settlements for other claimants, with cases pending. Ruth Hill reports.
Carl and Alison Dodd's Huntsbury home was damaged in the Christchurch earthquake and could not be repaired. Based on the estimated cost of a rebuild given to them by Southern Response, they opted to take the money and buy another house. But years later, they discovered Southern Response had failed to tell them about other costs to which they were entitled, totalling about $200,000. Justice David Gendel has found the company engaged in misleading and deceptive conducts and has ordered it to pay the couple almost $179,000. A class action underway claims about 3,000 homeowners may have been shortchanged by Southern Response. This is Ruth Hill.
The former Fonterra Chief Executive, Teo Spearings, is being urged to return a $4.7 million payout he received when he left the company last year. The payout was revealed as the dairy cooperative forecasts a loss of up to $675 million and has announced it will not be paying a dividend this financial year. Economic commentator Sam Stubbs says Mr Spearings should give the money back.
It would be the honourable thing to do. Of course, there's a contractual obligation there, which means he probably doesn't have to. And given that he's no longer working actively in New Zealand, I don't expect him to, but it would be very nice if he did, given that the decisions he was involved with clearly have effectively destroyed so much value over a long period of time.
Sam Stubbs from fund managing company Simplicity. DOC and the Defence Force have stepped back from the Fox River clean-up after helping volunteers remove visible rubbish from more than 1,300 hectares of riverbed and surrounding land. It is 4.5 months since the rubbish spilt from a disused landfill on the side of the river. The Defence Force says its last 17 personnel are leaving Westland, while DOC has closed its incident management centre. The equivalent of more than 14,500 bags of rubbish were removed during the concentrated effort over the past 6 weeks. It's coming up to 5:05. The 2 Ds, discipline and defence, have been the focus for the All Blacks this week as they prepare for tomorrow's deciding Bledisloe Cup test against Australia at Eden Park. Coach Steve Hansen has made several changes to his lineup in the wake of the surprise loss in Perth. Lose again tomorrow and the All Blacks will surrender the Bledisloe Cup for the first time in 17 years. All Blacks captain Kieran Reid says he knows exactly where the side needs to improve.
It's our discipline and our ability to defend early, so that's going to be key. They put pressure on us through that ball carry last week, and that's where we have to respond tomorrow.
Kieran Reid. And the former All Black halfback Bruce Deans has died after a short battle with cancer. He was 58. Deans represented Canterbury during its famous Ranfurly Shield reign between 1982 and 1985 and played 10 tests between 1987 and 1989. New Zealand have grabbed an early wicket on day 3 of the first cricket test against Sri Lanka in Gore. Resuming at 227 for 7, still 22 runs behind the Black Caps, Sri Lanka moved through cautiously to 242 before losing their 8th wicket just a short time ago, still 7 runs in arrears on the first innings. The Whakatane triathlete Hayden Wilde has finished 3rd at the Olympic test event in Tokyo. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we pay tribute to the private radio pioneer Ian McGann with a mixtape recorded before his death. Nathan Haynes is the Friday Night Live act, and Frank Natali introduces us to the element nitrogen, which, because it's a key ingredient in protein, will go nicely with the sonic tonic dedicated to meat and beans and black-eyed peas. On Nights, top of the food chain with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The North Island from North Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to periods of rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, fine tonight. A cold southerly change later tomorrow will bring rain. South Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairatapa and Nelson. A few showers in the west tonight. Rain and cold southerlies developing tomorrow, with brief heavy falls, then easing later in the day. Snow lowering to 700 metres. Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine tonight. Rain and cold southerlies developing tomorrow morning, with snow to 400 metres, then easing to showers later in the day. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms clearing tomorrow. Otago and Southland, rain spreading north tonight, snow lowering to 500 metres overnight, then gradually clearing tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods tonight, rain developing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and this is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Misleading and deceptive. That's how the High Court has described the behaviour of Southern Response, the state-owned quake insurer, and it could cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. In a ruling released today, the court found Southern Response failed to act in a fair and transparent way and breached its duty of good faith in dealing with Christchurch couple Carl and Alison Dodds, whose quake-damaged house was written off. Southern Response gave the Dodds an edited version of a cost assessment for rebuilding their house. Now, that abridged assessment was tens of thousands of dollars less than the full estimate that the insurer kept secret from them. The couple unwittingly settled on the lesser figure in 2013, meaning they were shortchanged almost $200,000. Now the court's ordered Southern Response to pay up. I asked their lawyer, Peter Woods, his reaction to the court's finding.
Oh, well, it's a great result for the homeowner and for hundreds, if not thousands, of other homeowners as well. But it's very disappointing that we had to take the claim to the court when Southern Response should have known that what they've done was wrong.
Can you you just sum up the core findings here? Some of the language used by the court is very strong, isn't it?
It is. The judge has been very forthright in holding that what Southern Response did, it did intentionally, and it was misleading and deceptive to do that, and also in breach of good faith.
So in a nutshell, what was Southern Response up to here?
Well, what they were doing was they were telling the homeowner, we have estimated the cost of replacing your home, rebuilding it, and here's our estimate, and they gave them a spreadsheet. But at the same time, they had removed a section of the spreadsheet which amounted to about 20% of the cost. So the homeowner thought, okay, you're estimating it cost me this much to rebuild my home. I can now go and buy a new house with that much. And yet Southern Response knew that it didn't disclose there was another 20% of cost in there.
So they were basically altering estimates and giving them a low estimate while keeping the full cost secret from the homeowner.
That's exactly what they were doing.
So you say this is significant not just for these homeowners. How many others? I mean, how frequently were they doing this?
Well, this covers people who settled their claims by buying another house before October 2014. And Southern Response has said there were about 1,650 of those, and they've estimated that this could cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
This is a state insurer we're talking about here.
I know it's not what you would expect of a state-owned entity, that they have consciously decided to withhold information. They did it at a time when there was some doubt about whether certain costs should be included. They thought including them caused confusion, so they thought, we'll keep it out. Then that issue went to the court. It went to the High Court, Court of Appeal and Supreme Court. The Court of Appeal said Southern Response has got that wrong. Those costs should be paid. And from that date, Southern Response started to disclose them. But it decided we're not going to go back to the people we've shortchanged and told you and tell them, hey, you've been shortchanged. We're just going to lie low and hope they'll never find out. So we're dealing with a category of people, 1,650 that bought other homes based on the information provided by Southern Response. But there is also another category of people that probably fit into it as well. I don't know how many there are. I've seen an estimate of a total of about 3,000 homeowners, in which case the amount involved will be well north of 300 million.
Yeah, well, it seems like the government's only just announced this Fix-It fund for repairs that were signed off by EQC yesterday. Well, they're going to have to kick a bit more into the pot, aren't they?
It's not just the government, it's all of us as taxpayers.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's an appalling situation that you've got Southern Response that chose to do that, and then when they knew it was wrong, they didn't even go back and remedy it.
So how would you characterise that behaviour?
Look, I think it's pretty cynical, just a cynical attempt to save some money.
So how much money and time would have been poured into fighting this case? Because you say it's a shame that you even had to do it this way, to resolve it by taking it through the courts.
Well, it appeared to us that Southern Response knew the significance of the case and they put everything into it. There was a huge amount of resource that got put into defending the claim. And it was unfortunate for our homeowners because they actually had to put more energy into it than you normally would just to deal with the defence that was put up by Southern Response. So it was obviously a gamble. We'll just have to wait and see if Southern Response are going to appeal.
Yeah, so your clients, the Dodds, what's their reaction?
Oh, look, they're very pleased. I've spoken with them today at length, and they're not really surprised. They think it's the right result. They've always thought they were right. Once they found out that the information had been withheld from them, they thought that Southern Response had been misleading and deceptive, and they see that the judge has agreed with them, and they're getting what they should have got many years ago.
And what does that mean for them?
Well, peace of mind for a start, because they were really distressed by the fact they'd been ripped off. Financially, there's about $220,000, plus they'll recover some of their costs.
But they had to really go to the mat to get what was rightfully theirs, didn't they?
They did, and look, it's a gruelling process. You speak to anyone who's been involved in a High Court trial, the process up to it is corrosive, and it's incredibly stressful dealing with the litigation in court. So, it will have taken a toll on them.
As you will be acutely aware, the government has recently announced that it wants to wind up Southern Response by the end of the year. Does that concern you in any way?
Look, I'm really surprised they think they can do that. They'll just have to transfer all of the Southern Response claims handling to another entity. I presume EQC is going to pick it up. I can see some benefit because at the moment they're carrying two sets of claims handling costs, EQC and Southern Response. Perhaps they want to consolidate that, but hey, there's no way they can avoid this liability. They can't just walk away from it.
Who's to blame for this mess?
Well, at the trial, the Southern Response witness said the decision was made at a senior management level to withhold this information. So it was at the top.
And the motivations to do that?
It's all going to be about saving cost, I think.
So shortchanging homeowners?
Yes.
And what do you make of that?
Look, I think it's an appalling way for a state-owned insurer to act. They, I suspect they just underestimated the cost they were facing when they went in to salvage AMI. It was a great thing they did that, but they just didn't do it properly, and they've tried to cut corners. And we've seen it with the repair program as well. It's been a disaster. So, it's all about, once they got in there, it's all been about, well, how do we do this as cheap as possible? And it's really, those sorts of decisions turn around and bite them on the bum, frankly, because you get claims like this, now hundreds of millions, you get defective repair claims, hundreds of millions, and it just goes on and on.
Peter, it was a decision made by senior management, as you point out, and a conscious decision. To the best of your knowledge, are the managers that made that decision still within Southern Response?
I don't know. In court, they weren't named, and I haven't got any visibility as to who was running Southern Response. I don't know.
If they're still there, should they still be there?
Well, it would be nice for someone to be accountable, wouldn't it? One of the huge problems we've had, from my point of view, with this whole mess of EQC and now Southern Response, is there's just no accountability.
Yeah, Southern Response says it's received the findings and will be taking some time to assess the information, and it says it will be making no further comment at this stage. It's almost 18 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Really keen for your feedback on that story. Misleading and deceptive behaviour is what Southern Response has been found guilty of. What do you make of that? Who should be held responsible? Who's accountable? It could cost taxpayers a lot of money. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Police have launched a manhunt after an Australian tourist was shot dead in a camper van near Raglan. The 33-year-old man was asleep with his fiancée when a gunman smashed into their van in the early hours of the morning. While the woman managed to escape, running kilometres for help, the body of her partner was later found by police. Andrew McRae reports.
The Australian tourist was travelling with his Canadian partner when they parked their camper van near the popular beach town of Raglan. They were asleep for the night when the vehicle was approached by the offender, who fired shots into the van. The woman managed to escape uninjured and ran some distance through bush to contact police. But the body of her partner was later found still in the camper van near Wellington. Detective Inspector Graham Cathlery says the woman is distraught and is being cared for by police.
Still working through in regards to injuries that she may or may not have obtained during the ordeal. The terrain where the vehicle was stolen is quite rough with a lot of bush around.
He says it appears to have been a random attack.
It is understandable and concerning to have an armed offender outstanding, but I want to reassure the public we are working hard to identify and locate the offender. It is our absolute priority.
Mr Pitkethly says all officers will be armed while the search is underway for the offender.
This is a precautionary measure to keep our public safe, and we ask the community to be alert and report any suspicious activity.
Police are reluctant to talk about what happened between the time of the shooting and the van being found about 80 kilometres away.
Anyone that has seen the van between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. between Raglan and Gortington to please contact police as soon as possible.
Detective Inspector Pitkethly was also reluctant to say much about the man they were seeking.
At this stage, all I can say is that we're seeking a male in regards to it. As more details become available, we will release that to the public who can assist us in locating him. What I can say is that someone out there in the community knows who this offender is, and so I'm asking them to contact police immediately.
Police say they haven't recovered a firearm, and it's an assumption the man is still armed.
This is a random attack by, at this stage, what we can attribute to a sole offender, but due to the circumstances of the attack, it is likely that he has confided in members of his community.
Detective Inspector Pitkethly says they're working through some information that's been supplied by the public. Scene examinations continue at both Te Toto Gorge and Gortington. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, Corps Andrew McRae-Tene.
Former Fonterra Chief Executive Teo Spearings is under fire for receiving a $4.7 million payout when he left the dairy giant last year. The revelation follows the news the country's largest company is forecasting a loss of up to $675 million and won't be paying a dividend this financial year after a string of write-downs. Matthew Tunison reports.
Fonterra says Teo Spearings was given $4.7 million when he left the co-op last August. It says the payment covered the final part of a deferred bonus dating back to 2017 and Mr Spearings' final remuneration for this year, including his base salary, superannuation and holiday pay. Mr Spearings' annual salary was $2.5 million, but he earned over $8 million for each of the last 2 years with bonuses. No one from Fonterra would be interviewed about Mr Spearings' salary, but the Regional Economic Development Minister Shane Jones described the amount as offensive, considering the role Mr Spearings played in, quote, bringing our national cooperative to its knees.
The fact that the directors signed a contract enabling him to wander off with such a gross amount of money, which he never earned, and we in New Zealand are left with this fiscal carnage. It's just beyond belief.
Shane Jones says Fonterra's dysfunctional board seems incapable of reining in corporate excess.
I can tell you today that the Dutchman, the former CEO, is celebrating a famous Dutch saying. It's as if an angel is peeing on your tongue. Well, he's richly relieved himself upon the tongue of Fonterra, and the rest of us in New Zealand, not just farmers, are left with the cost.
Sam Stubbs from the funds manager Simplicity says in slightly less colourful language that Teo Spearings should give the money back.
It would be the honourable thing to do. Of course, there's a contractual obligation there, which means he probably doesn't have to. And given that he's no longer working actively in New Zealand, I don't expect him to, but it would be very nice if he did, given that the decisions he was involved with clearly have effectively destroyed so much value over a long period of time.
Mr Stubbs says the case highlights a fundamental problem with executive compensation.
There is something wrong with an organisation that pays its chief executive $38 million at a time when so much farmer value and shareholder value has been lost.
On Monday, Fonterra said it expected to write down the value of 4 significant overseas ventures in South America, China and Australia by more than $600 million. That came after it posted its first loss in its 17-year history last year of nearly $200 million, which prompted a review of the group's operations. Agricultural economist Peter Fraser says while Teo Spearings certainly made some big mistakes, Fonterra's problems can't only be put down to him.
They seem to blame everything that's gone wrong, either directly or indirectly, on Teo Spearings. Look, Teo's made some whoppers, but he's not entirely to blame. Writing off $70 million for the Australian business, Fonterra's Australian business has been a dog for years. farmers have complained about it for years because it doesn't make cost of capital. The fact that they've got droughts over there and the fact they've had to close down plants, that's not TO's fault.
His fault or not, Fonterra says the incentives scheme which gave Teo Spearings his bonuses has been discontinued. In Auckland for Checkpoint, call Matthew Tunison 10A.
And do let us know what you think of that. A departure cheque of about $4.7 million. Should he give some of it back, as some people are suggesting, or is it his contract, and should he get what he's entitled to according to that contract? 2101 on the text, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 25 minutes after 5. Exploding rat populations across New Zealand have conservationists worried and exterminators busy. It's been blamed on a mega mast year, which basically means there's more food for predators, and that's having an impact on many parts of the country, with reports of mega rats causing havoc in urban areas and putting endangered bird life at risk in forests. Logan Church reports, and just a warning, if you're watching, some of the photos are a little bit graphic.
This year seems to be the year of the rat, with huge rat populations reported throughout much of New Zealand. And that's kept Darren Lamborum of Wellington Pest Management busy. He's seen a 35% increase in business on last year.
There's been a lot of rodent activity in the last 2 or 3 months, particularly around bushy areas, which I suppose 90% of Wellington is, Rats live in the bush naturally. But as the population's increased and the nights have got colder, they're coming indoors.
And when those rats crawl inside, they cause havoc.
They're hearing noises in the roofs, or they're getting damage reported by, the dishwasher doesn't go and the electrician comes along and, the rats have been chewing wiring and so forth. So, damage, and I suppose people hearing them in the walls and ceilings and things like that.
But it's not just in the sittings. In Auckland's Waitakere Rangers, Forest and Birds' Gillian Weddams is gearing up for a fight, with record rat numbers prompting an emergency eradication operation.
We've got about 400 volunteers working very hard here, doing our best to limit any further increase in rat numbers and get the rat numbers back down in time for the bird breeding season. So we're doing, as we do anyway, lots of baiting and trapping, and we're doing a bit more intensive of that.
Forest and Birds gathering hundreds of volunteers to try and get those rat numbers under control.
We've got about 400 volunteers working very hard here, doing our best to limit any further increase in rat numbers and get the rat numbers back down in time for the bird breeding season. So we're doing, as we do anyway, lots of baiting and trapping, and we're doing a bit more intensive of that.
Down south, Alton Smith of the Orokonui Eco Sanctuary near Dunedin says a large fence installed around the facility keeps rats out, and he's noticing a change.
What we have definitely noticed, because we've had an external trap line around the fence since 2012, and over the last 3 years in particular, we have noticed a more of a high sustained catch rate of ship rats in particular around the fence.
This nationwide growth is down to what's been called a mega mast year. Last seen in 2014, it essentially means the winter is milder, and that's resulted in an abundance of food in the forests. While this is great for native wildlife, it also results in an explosion in predators that hunt them.
This year in particular, some of the podocarps, the remu and the mero, are laden with fruit. So there's just an abundant amount of food out there. So it's sort of a combination between not having extreme winters and more food would naturally lead on to more things like rats running around.
As mast years get more frequent, time is ticking on the government's goal to be predator-free by 2050. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
The police have arrested the man wanted in relation to the theft of 2 police-issued Glocks from a patrol car in Gore. Hori Gemmell was arrested late this afternoon and is in custody in Gore. Superintendent Paul Basham addressed media outside the Gore police station a short time ago, and our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown is in Gore and joins us now. Good evening, Timothy. What can you tell us about the arrest?
Good evening, Lisa. I can tell you that Mr. Gemmell was arrested at a property at a rural area west of Matoda, just out of Gore. He was arrested about 3 o'clock this afternoon. Police have not gone into many of the details of the arrest, but they have conceded that there was an ambulance here at the station waiting when he got back, and a couple of people have been treated for injuries related to dog bites. A dog was deployed, but no shots were fired, no firearm was presented.
So obviously an important part of this case is these 2 Glock pistols. What do we know of their whereabouts?
The police have said, along with Mr. Gemmell, one of the Glocks has been recovered. It was recovered from the same address where he was located. However, the other Glocks remains outstanding. Police have also not said whether any cartridges are missing from the recovered Glock, but they say that the magazine has been located along with one weapon.
And has anyone else been arrested in this matter?
Yes, as I said, 2 people were treated for injuries received from the dog involved in the arrest, and there is another person in custody. The police have not provided any details of that person's identity. I do not know whether it's a male or a female, how old they are, and how they are known to Mr. Gemmell.
Thank you very much. That is Timothy Brown joining us from Gore there, where the police have just held a media conference to confirm that they have arrested Gore Gemmell, who was on the run after that incident in Gore. Only one of the police-issue Glocks have been recovered, as you heard there. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the big question, would you eat chicken feet or are they just pet food? The Invercargill City Council asks questions of a local restaurant. Hong Kong braces for more mass protests over the weekend, and you might not have heard of them, but the New Zealand men's fistball side is making a name for themselves at the World Champs. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme so far today, 2101 on the text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can reach us via email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
Southern Response has been ordered to pay $179,000 to a family for misleading them over their earthquake-damaged home. The High Court ruling could expose the government insurer to millions of dollars in settlements for other claimants with cases pending. Justice David Gendel has found the company engaged in misleading and deceptive conducts. A class action underway claims about 3,000 homeowners may have been shortchanged by Southern Response. A Southland man accused of stealing 2 police-issued Glock pistols is in custody. Police confirmed Gore Gemmell was located this afternoon after more than 36 hours on the run. Superintendent Paul Basham says more than 50 officers have been involved in the search for Mr. Gemmell. Police have launched a homicide inquiry after a 33-year-old Australian man died in a random shooting attack on a camper van near Raglan in the early hours of this morning. A Canadian woman in the van survived, but the body of the Australian man was discovered hours later in a camper van near Hamilton. The police say the woman managed to escape uninjured and ran some distance through bush to contact police. Detective Inspector Graham Pitherley says it appears to have been a random attack. Lawyers are warning it won't be easy to completely block letters from prisoners with extremist views. It comes after the man accused of the Christchurch mosque attacks sent 2 letters corrections say should have been blocked. The Wellington barrister Graham Edgler says the prisoners will still be able to send letters as long as they don't breach rules set out in the Corrections Act. The police say no shots were fired during an arrest near the Pakuranga Mosque in Auckland this afternoon. The police say they arrested a 40-year-old man with assistance from the Armed Offenders Squad. And peak hour traffic services in Auckland are delayed or cancelled because of a track fault at Britomart. Auckland Transport says maintenance crews are trying to fix the problem. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And of course, you've tuned in at one of the most important times in the program. Madison Reedy is joining us for business. Hi, Madison.
They absolutely have. Hello, Lisa.
Manufacturing sector, not good news?
Yes, so the manufacturing sector is officially contracting. Forget slowing growth. We are now in decline in the manufacturing sector. So the performance of manufacturing index fell to a level of 48.2 in the month of July. Now, any measure in this index index above 50 indicates expansion. This is obviously sub 50, so we are in negative territory here. Now, this is the first time the manufacturing sector has been at this level since 2012. Now, it's here again for a number of reasons, being that it's new orders that the manufacturing sector received, they fell off. Also, the manufacturing sector's hiring intentions, their plans to employ more staff, that has also dropped off. Their level of production is just keeping its head above water. It did have a little bit of growth, albeit less than before, and it's only going to get worse for manufacturers as well. Softer economic growth around the world, particularly in the United States and Australia, means that there's going to be less demand for their products. You may not know, but most manufacturers in this country actually make niche component parts for other manufacturers. So, for example, if the economy in somewhere like Germany is contracting, which as of this week it officially is, the numbers say, then their consumers are going to be buying less, possibly buying less things like cars. That means, say, the Volkswagen factory won't be making as many vehicles, their machines won't be turning, they won't need to replace the cogs in their machines. New Zealand makes those cogs. The political opposition did take this one in their stride today too. Nationals finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says when Labour, New Zealand First and the Greens were in opposition, they declared a manufacturing crisis. The reality is that confidence in manufacturing is now much worse and the PMI is lower now than it was then. So Mr Goldsmith really rubbing some salt in this economic wound today.
Interesting, but somebody's still buying Sky TV. So what have they purchased?
They have purchased an Ireland-based rugby streaming website called Rugby Pass. It does have a website in New Zealand and a headquarters here too. It wasn't cheap though. Sky Network Television paid $40 million United States dollars for Rugby Pass, and that is converted to New Zealand dollars, just over 62 million bucks there. I should say though that they are paying for this in a mixture of cash and shares, so it's not all just a wad of cash for this one. They're buying it off the private equity firm Cooper & Co. Now, this will make Sky Television New Zealand not just a Kiwi-based company, but also a multinational firm, in effect, because Rugby Pass actually has the rights to broadcast Super Rugby and the Rugby Championship in 62 countries around the world, mostly in Asia, Europe, and in Australia. Now, this purchase, even though it is very large, it is in line with Sky's new strategy under their new chief executive, Martin Stewart, to double down on sport. In fact, this week they actually launched their new sport streaming app called Sky Sport Now, and that's going to get its probably its first run for its money this weekend with the second Bledisloe Cup game that I'll be watching, but you probably won't be, Lisa.
We're going to talk more about that later in the show, but let's do a quick pre-weekend skip around the markets. What do you got?
The NZX Top 50 index closed down 0.5%, so that's a fall of 49 points tonight to close at 10,655. The New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 64.4 US cents, 94.8 to the Australian and 53.2 British pence. We're down against all of our major trading partners this evening because of that manufacturing result.
Thanks, Madison. Madison Reedy with our business wrap. White supremacist Philip Arps is being accused of sending letters of a violent nature from his jail cell. Arps was jailed in June for distributing the live-streamed video of the March 15th mosque attacks in Christchurch. The letters were raised in the Christchurch High Court today, where Arps was appealing his 21-month sentence. It comes as the Corrections Department rushes to put more checks in place for letters written by prisoners with extremist views, after it was revealed the accused mosque gunman sent 2 letters from jail that should have been blocked. Alicia Foon filed this report.
Today, Crown Prosecutor Shivani Dayal said Philip Arps had sent letters of a violent nature from his prison cell. While the Crown had not obtained the letters, she said they could cause further damage by spreading a message of hate. That's shocked members of the Muslim community, already reeling from news that the Christchurch mosque attack accused managed to send 2 letters from his jail cell that should have been blocked. John Milne, whose 14-year-old son died in the attacks, has this message for corrections about Philip Arps.
I would say to them, don't let anything in or out without extreme perusal. I don't think he should be allowed to send any more letters out, actually. I think he's already put himself in a jeopardising situation where he should not be allowed to send any more letters out, and I think that the letters he is receiving should be highly scrutinised as well.
John Milne says these letters carrying messages of hate are dangerous.
It just must never happen again that he is allowed to spread hatred with the risk of someone else doing a copycat crime.
But lawyers are warning it won't be easy to change the rules around sending letters from prison after a promised crackdown from corrections in the wake of Brent and Terence letters slipping through. The slip-up has been blamed on 2 corrections staff responsible for reviewing his letters, an intelligence analyst and a prison director. Chief Executive Christine Stevenson isn't ruling out taking action against the individual employees. She says she'll take personal responsibility from now on for the accused mosque attacker's mail.
From this morning, mail sent by those prisoners who are identified as having extremist ideologies or who have registered victims will be centralised, and a highly professional and skilled team will look at those letters.
But Wellington barrister Graham Edgeless says Terence letters simply got out because the content was deemed lawful.
Threaten or intimidate someone? Does it endanger someone's safety? Does it pose a threat to the security of the prison? Does it encourage someone to break the law? There's just, half a dozen very quite explicit things that you are not allowed to do in a letter to or a letter from a prisoner. If it does one of those things, they can withhold it, and if it doesn't, they can't.
Corrections officials are advising Minister Kelvin Davis on possible law changes to prevent another slip-up. The potential for law changes has prompted concerns from the accused gunman's mother, Sharon Tarrant, who told the New Zealand Herald she's worried her only contact with her son might be stopped. She says it breaks her heart to see the prison system being hammered when they've never had to deal with anything like this before. Mr. Edgeless says Sharon Tarrant doesn't need to worry about correspondence with her son being blocked because corrections can't legally stop him from sending letters altogether.
There can be restrictions on other things that might be rights or privileges. So they might be able to stop her making a physical visit. But prisoners get to make phone calls. The phone calls can be monitored. Prisoners get to send letters. The letters can be monitored. So she will still be able to send letters to her son, and her son will still be able to send letters to her, as long as he doesn't do the types of things that corrections can withhold the letter over.
His thoughts are echoed by Massey University law professor Chris Gallivan, who says there's no problem with the legal framework.
There's always going to be a human element of this unless we come up with some algorithm that can be then written by somebody in an app that these letters can be reviewed by. They're going to have to be looked at by a human being, and that's going to involve an element of discretion. And in this circumstance, I think that's entirely appropriate.
Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis says Cabinet will discuss on Monday whether the law around the ability of inmates to send letters is fit for purpose. Ke ototahi aho mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Elisha Fern tēnei.
Overseas now, it's been hailed as a miracle. A passenger plane carrying 233 people made an emergency landing in a cornfield on the outskirts of Moscow after striking a flock of birds shortly after takeoff. Reuters' Francesca Liner reports.
A Russian passenger jet carrying 233 people was forced to make an emergency landing in a cornfield after striking a flock of birds just after takeoff from a Moscow airport. No one died in the incident. 23 people suffered injuries, according to the Ministry of Health. The engines of the Ural Airlines plane were turned off when the plane made the emergency landing, and it also had its landing gear up, said a spokeswoman for Russia's Civil Aviation Authority. An unnamed passenger interviewed by state television said the plane had started to shake violently shortly after takeoff, and a smell of burning filled the cabin. The pilot has been lauded a hero for masterfully landing the plane and saving so many lives. State TV said the manoeuvre is now being dubbed the Miracle over Ramensk, a reference to the district of Moscow where the plane came down.
And it's 17 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the program today. We're keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. In China, anger is threatening to boil over towards the protesters in Hong Kong, with state media calling them extremists, separatists and even terrorists. China's government initially censored news of the Hong Kong protests, but the violent actions of a group this week who mobbed 2 men at the city's airport are huge news on the mainland. In Hong Kong, police have now banned 2 upcoming protests planned for this weekend and have confirmed they've arrested 748 people since the mass anti-extradition law protests began in June. The ABC's China correspondent Bill Birtles is in the border city of Shenzhen and sent this report.
At the Shenzhen Bay Pier, locals and tourists from across the mainland snap selfies over the water. On one side, the narrow tall towers of Hong Kong. On the other, the Shenzhen Bay Sports Complex, where thousands of paramilitary troops are conducting drills. Dozens of trucks and armoured personnel carriers are parked there too, but it's not China's army. Instead, it's the domestic paramilitary force known as the People's Armed Police. While security is tight around the complex, the troops and all their vehicles are parked inside, and most of the locals going for a late afternoon stroll along the pier seemed unaware of their presence. A young woman, Wang Xiao, says people across China are now well aware of the unrest in Hong Kong.
I hope Hong Kongers can be rational. I read news about Hong Kong and I think they are really out of control. The young people stopped working to protest. The world knows Hong Kong is part of China. All you foreigners know that too. I hope they can return to peace soon.
For weeks, the government's media has been saturating the Chinese internet with stories of protester violence in Hong Kong. The sometimes brutal clashes with police have been completely blamed on the demonstrators. But the beating and humiliation of 2 men, including a state media reporter, at Hong Kong's airport this week by protesters, has ignited genuine fury. 20-year-old student Chiu Moore has followed it closely.
I heard about that journalist at the airport this week who got beaten up just because he supported the Hong Kong police. I think that's ridiculous. This is really different from what those people say about democracy and freedom.
Adding to the nationalist fervour is the martial arts star Jackie Chan, a Hong Konger by birth, but now one of Beijing's most patriotic voices. In this video released by state television, he talks of how great China is, how much he loves the nation's flag, and how events in Hong Kong have saddened him. Many people here believe the Chinese government claim that the CIA and other hostile foreign forces are behind the Hong Kong protests, and the foreign media is sometimes blamed too. When AM asked one young man and his girlfriend about Hong Kong, he refused to take part in what he said were our efforts to smear China. He then walked over to 2 paramilitary policemen on patrol and abruptly reported what we were doing. They started following and filming us, so it was time to go.
And that was Bill Birtles reporting from Shenzhen. And Hong Kong is bracing for more mass protests over the weekend as China warns it could use its power to quell demonstrations. Dr. Kenneth Chan is an Associate Professor of Government and International Studies at Hong Kong Baptist University. He's also a former lawmaker in the Hong Kong legislature. I asked Professor Chan how he thinks the protests will end.
At the moment, I don't think this is going to end very soon. I mean, the protesters and also the authorities are both escalating, and they are reluctant to negotiate and come to terms to any kind of agreement. So, no, I don't think this is going to end, even though the summer is coming to an end, and a lot of people would expect young people, particularly university students, would go back to their campus. I'm afraid this time around, this is not going to happen.
There are reports, obviously, of intense military activity from China. Is it bravado and bluff, or do you think there is an expectation they will intervene?
This is a very good question. At the moment, I would say that it is unlikely to see military intervention in Hong Kong because the costs would be huge, and I don't think Beijing is prepared to pay them yet. That said, Hong Kong is known to be a one-party dictatorship which has used brute force against dissent before. So it's being portrayed as a last resort, if you like, should the Hong Kong government fail to restore order with heavier and more aggressive policing. Politically, I would say that Beijing has flexed its muscles to ensure the business and professional communities that are dependent on China to toe the line against the protesters. So there's a red line, and I think even in the absence of a military intervention, Hong Kong's autonomy will be severely undermined as Beijing is set to tighten its grip over Hong Kong.
How worried will Beijing be about this?
I think Beijing's concern, number one, would be stability and order and fending off what they call foreign interventions, interference in Chinese domestic or national affairs. So order above all. So as I said, military intervention will still be used as a piece of propaganda, intimidation to try to sort of calm the situation down a little bit and help Carrie Lam, a government which has zero legitimacy in the eyes of most Hong Kong people, to try her best to come to some sort of, orderly end of the affair. But as I said, it's very difficult to foresee a peaceful, orderly, harmonious end of this whole saga, which, of course, is of Carrie Lam's own making.
How reflective of general Hong Kongers do you think the protesters are? Do they have the support?
The protesters are working very well, I would say, this time around, as compared with the umbrella movement, which took place 5 years ago in 2014. The society back then was rather polarized and split between a pretty, sizable support for the government and Beijing, and equally sizable, perhaps, support for the pro-democracy movement. This time around, I can see that people in Hong Kong are more determined as ever, as we sense a sense of autonomy. Our autonomy in Hong Kong has been, threatened, undermined, not only by the extradition law and by as well as by the intensifying of the rhetoric against Hong Kong from Beijing and the pro-Beijing sections of the population. So this time around, I see stronger and more sort of unified opposition to the government of the day. Now, frankly, if you keep asking or we keep thinking how this would all end, I think the best way out would be, and also a cheaper way out would be, just sacking Carrie Lam and have a reshuffle of the government.
And do you think that would put a stop to it?
I think that would definitely satisfy a lot of people in Hong Kong with the so-called 5 demands, not only withdrawing once and for all the extradition bill, but also holding the government accountable for all the troubles caused.
How likely do you think that would be to happen?
I think this is increasingly likely, I would say, knowing the fact that this has become a long, drawn-out saga in Hong Kong ever since its handover some 22 years ago. So I think the Beijing leaders would have to consider options. At the moment, of course, we can see the more traditional, communist propaganda style tactics and psychological warfare against Hong Kong. But deep down, I think, come on, the government is not viable, to be honest. Everybody understands that, even the pro-Beijing people understand that. So I think it's just a matter of time that the Carrie Lam government would need to go. It's a matter of faith sometimes that Beijing refuses to make the concession, the necessary concession to the dissent and to the people. But I think perhaps I still have hope that some degree of rationality will still be there to inform the leaders of Beijing that it's time to let Carrie Lam go, have a new government, and therefore a better start.
But even if that were to happen, Professor, it seems unlikely that she would be replaced with a liberal leader as such.
Well, a change of government doesn't mean liberalism or democracy, but at least is a logical step to take, in my view. And also, is at the end of the day a political issue. I mean, all the troubles that we're talking about with face day in day out here in Hong Kong stem from governance crisis. And what would be the solution? A military solution is not a solution. It's not going to help to resolve the political crisis. It's going to actually spell the end of Hong Kong as a global financial center. It's bad for China as well, not only in terms of reputation, but also real economic and financial benefits. Losing Hong Kong's global reputation after a military crackdown. So a political solution may as well be as simple as to remove Carrie Lam, this very unpopular, troublemaking administration.
Dr. Kenneth Chan speaking to us there from Hong Kong. And in breaking news, police say they have arrested the 21-year-old man they were seeking in relation to the death of a man in the Christchurch suburb of New Brighton. Homeless man Deem Amies was killed by a van whose driver was fleeing the police in the suburb of New Brighton on Wednesday last week. Now, since then, the police have raided 24 properties and arrested 15 people in their search for the offender. The police say their investigation into Mr. Amies' death continues. In a little more than 24 hours' time, the much-anticipated Bledisloe Cup decider between the All Blacks and Australia will kick off at Eden Park. A record-breaking Wallabies win in Perth last weekend has breathed life into tomorrow night's test, given a New Zealand loss would end their 16-year grip on the prized trophy. The match also comes just 5 weeks before the All Blacks Rugby World Cup opener in Japan, with just one game against Tonga to come before that clash against the Springboks in Yokohama. Sports reporter Clay Wilson was at the captain's run at Eden Park this afternoon, and I asked him how the team was tracking on the eve of such a significant test.
Well, I guess a little bit of surprise at first to see three players like Ben Smith, Owen Franks, Rieko Ioane, 213 test caps between them, left out. Although it's not completely surprising, their form hasn't been that great at their best the first three games of this rugby championship. We've seen the Australian media jump on it and calling the All Blacks selectors panicked and things of this nature. But Steve Hanson's very much stressed that this isn't so much about form, it's more about testing some of these younger players, Sevu Reece, George Bridge, in the sort of white-hot cauldron of a high-pressure game that this is. I'm not sure...
Yeah, do you buy it?
I totally buy it. I mean, really, Smith and Ioane and Franks, they really have been quite a bit below their best, and that's partly to do with how the team's played as well. But I think it is more form-related. That would be my impression. But he is stressing that it is about testing them in the environment ahead of the World Cup. But that creates a discussion of its own about, is it the right thing to do when you're trying to retain a Bledisloe Cup, a trophy that's so important to the team and All Black fans all around the world.
So does he rate the World Cup as a bigger prize than the
Well, he did stress that yesterday in his press conference that the World Cup was the number one, and for that there had to be one eye on the World Cup. But it does tend to a little bit perhaps go against some of the sentiment around the Bledisloe Cup. But sort of hard to argue the World Cup is number one, and if you are preparing to try and win that's the ultimate priority, then you do what you have to do.
So the Wallabies win in Perth last weekend. It really stunned a lot of people. So has that generated extra interest for this game?
Oh, it certainly has. You only have to sort of walk around the tea rooms or here in the office or walk around the streets, or friends I have. And I think the real judge of this has been casual observers. I've spoken to a number of people who probably wouldn't normally be super interested in this, but because the All Blacks are so used to winning, we're so used to thinking that a win for the All Blacks is a foregone conclusion. That's not the case this week, and for a lot of people that's really interesting. And I tend
so it's good for rugby that we lost.
Oh, well, maybe the most ardent All Blacks supporter wouldn't agree with you, but I think there's definitely an argument that it is a lot more interesting. No one expected it to be in this situation. And then you add the fact that we're 5 weeks away from the World Cup into this, along with all the stuff around the Bledisloe Cup and all the stuff around the history with Eden Park. It just creates sort of a perfect storm of interest for this.
So this test will also follow the Black Ferns clash against the Australian women's side. And what can we expect from that match?
Well, this is the second test of the Laurie O'Reilly Memorial Trophy, which is the women's equivalent of the Bledisloe Cup. The first test in Perth last week, we saw the Black Ferns have a convincing win in that game. They won by 47 points to 10, so fairly convincing. And it's their 18th straight win against the Wallaroos. They've never lost to the Australian women's team, in fact. So I think we can expect the Black Ferns being back on home soil, and also this is their last test of the year, so they'll be pretty motivated, and I think we can expect a similar result to last week. They'll have a point to prove in front of their home fans and want to finish their year on a high.
Hey, just before you go, what are we expecting weather-wise tomorrow night? Because it's sold out. It's sold out, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty dodgy out there at the moment, and I think we can expect that and more probably tomorrow. The forecast is for showers during the day, turning to rain at night, some northwesterly breezes. So perhaps if there's a bit of rain, a bit of wind around, we can expect that it's going to be a slightly different game to last week. We saw 73 points scored last week. Expect perhaps more a tighter, not so high scoring game as we saw last week, just with the conditions and the nature of the game itself, what's on the line.
Okay, money down now, Clay. Call it.
Oh, All Blacks definitely on home soil. 42 tests at Eden Park unbeaten. I think it'll be 43. I haven't been as confident as I've been in the past, but I think the All Blacks would have, I'm going to say, probably 5 to 10 points.
Okay, we'll hold you to it. A relatively confident Clay Wilson there. Some time for some of your feedback on Southern Response. Now, this is a story about the High Court finding that Southern Response was deceptive and misleading. This person's got in touch to say, I'm not surprised of the High Court outcome. As a contractor for Southern Response for many years, I can confirm it was not only homeowners that were being cheated, as well as being part of a system that set homeowners against contractors. On Fonterra, this is the $4.7 million cheque for the departing CEO, Teo Spearings. It's been revealed the value of that departure cheque. Surely the Fonterra contract should only pay a bonus for positive results for the company. Since Teo's decisions created a massive loss, how could directors calculate a bonus based on performance, says this person. And Celia's been in touch saying Spearings should give it all back. Taking millions of money when others get nothing is an economic sociopath.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. The lawyer for a family that took earthquake insurer Southern Response to the High Court says it's a shame Southern Response didn't admit earlier it was in the wrong. The High Court has found Southern Response engaged in misleading and deceiving conduct with the Dodd family, and what their lawyer Peter Woods says is a great result for them and hundreds of other homeowners. The state insurer gave the Dodds an edited version of the cost estimate for rebuilding their house, and the court has ordered Southern Response to pay the family nearly $179,000 plus interest as a result. Mr. Woods says they acted in breach of good faith.
It's not what you would expect of a state-owned entity that they have consciously decided to withhold information. They did it at a time when there was some doubt about whether certain costs should be included. They thought including them caused confusion, so they thought we'll keep it out.
Lawyer Peter Woods. A Southland man accused of stealing 2 police-issued Glock pistols is in custody, but one of the firearms is still missing. The police confirmed 24-year-old Hori Gemmell was located this afternoon after more than 36 hours searching for him. He is accused of ramming a police car shortly after overnight in Gore on Wednesday before stealing a patrol vehicle, ramming another police car and fleeing with the pistols. Southern District Commander Superintendent Paul Basham says charges will be laid in due course. He says one of the stolen guns was found with Mr Gemmell and they're still looking for the other.
Anyone potentially involved in hiding or disposing of that firearm should know that we will continue to have a relentless focus on its recovery. Anyone tempted to hide or dispose of that firearm should understand that we will have a relentless focus on them until such time as it is recovered.
Paul Basham, the Southern District Police Commander. The police have arrested a man following an investigation into the death of a homeless man in a hit and run in Christchurch last week. Homeless man Dean Amies was killed by a van fleeing the police in the suburb of New Brighton last Wednesday. Earlier this week, the police said they had arrested 15 people, recovered 6 firearms, drugs and 2 stolen cars as they searched for 21-year-old Liam Strickland. In a statement, the Acting District Commander Superintendent Mike Johnson says the Armed Offenders Squad arrested a 21-year-old man this evening. Police have launched a homicide inquiry after a 33-year-old Australian man died in a random shooting attack on a camper van in the early hours of this morning near Raglan. The man's body was discovered hours later in the stolen camper van near Hamilton. The police say the Canadian woman who was also in the van managed to escape uninjured and ran some distance through bush to contact police. They say she is shocked and distressed. Detective Inspector Graham Pitt-Kethley says police are working hard hard to identify and locate the offender, and in the meantime, all officers in Waikato will be armed. Lawyers are warning it won't be easy to completely block letters from prisoners with extremist views. It comes after the man being held over the Christchurch mosque attacks sent 2 letters corrections say should have been blocked. An expert team has begun checking all letters written by prisoners with extremist views, and corrections staff are advising the corrections minister on possible law changes to prevent another slip-up. The alleged gunman's mother told NZME she's worried her only contact with her son will be stopped. But Wellington barrister Graham Edgeler says corrections won't be able to stop all correspondence.
There can be restrictions on other things that might be rights or privileges. So they might be able to stop her making a physical visit, but prisoners get to make phone calls. The phone calls can be monitored. Prisoners get to send letters. The letters can be monitored. So she will still be able to send letters to her son, and her son will still be able to send letters to her, as long as he doesn't do the types of things that corrections can withhold the letter over.
Wellington lawyer Graham Edgeler. The number of measles cases in Auckland has jumped by 81 in the past week, bringing the total to 456 cases in the region. The Auckland Public Health Service says it is the worst week since the current outbreak began in March, with 6 more cases reported in just the last day. Official figures show 516 confirmed cases for the country as of Wednesday. In Auckland, the recommended age for the measles vaccination has been lowered for children from 15 months old to 12 months old. Nationwide, the shots are free and recommended for anyone aged under 50 who has never been vaccinated. New Zealand Food Safety is warning people who like chicken feet not to eat any intended for pets, as they may get sick. The Invercargill City Council says they'll be talking to one local restaurant after it appeared to have served chicken feet labelled pet food. Greg Lawrence, the general manager at Brink's Poultry, whose label was on the box spotted at the diner, says they don't supply chicken feet to eateries directly, but to distributors.
Basically, we have 2 types, an A-grade chicken feet and B-grade chicken feet. Now, the A-grade chicken feet is fit for human consumption. The B-grade chicken feet, we downgrade that and we label that accordingly. It is not fit for human consumption and for pet food only.
Greg Lawrence says the B-grade product can be dirty, blemished and contain feathers. He also says there's a significant price difference between the 2 grades. It's just past 6:05. Sri Lanka have eked out an 18-run first innings in the first cricket test against New Zealand in Gore. The hosts began day 3 on 227 for 7 in reply to the Black Caps' first innings total of 249 and got through to 267. Off-spinner Will Somerville took 2 of the 3 wickets to fall today, with pace bowler Trent taking the other. The Black Ferns hope they can set the tone for the All Blacks come tomorrow's double header against Australia at Eden Park. The New Zealand women's rugby side achieved what their male counterparts couldn't last weekend in Perth, trouncing their Australian women's team 47-10, but then had to sit and watch the All Blacks capitulate 47-26 to the Wallabies. The All Blacks now face losing the Bledisloe Cup for the first time in 17 years. Black Ferns vice-captain Kendra Coxedge says hopefully both results can go New Zealand's way this weekend.
We were gutted for the guys and we connected a little bit with them this week, which is cool, and hopefully, we put out a good performance, lift the crowd, and then hopefully the crowd gets in behind the boys, and, it's the Bledisloe so important to them, and we want to make sure that we can support them as much as possible.
Kendra Coxedge, the Black Ferns vice-captain. The National Rugby League's women's competition has introduced 2 standalone matches for the first time since the competition's inception last year. One will be the Warriors match at Mount Smart Stadium on September 22nd. Last year, all the women's games were played as curtain raisers before the men's finals matches. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Tim Brown on his transition from football to footwear. Sanam Mayer on the tragically short life of Pakistan's first social media star. And what is it about craft beer and beards? The very bearded Pete Gillespie might explain. Join me tomorrow morning for from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The North Island from North Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. A few showers turning to periods of rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay fine tonight. Cold southerly change later tomorrow will bring rain. South Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa and Nelson. A few showers in the west tonight. Rain and cold southerlies developing tomorrow. Brief, heavy falls, then easing later in the day. Snow lowering to 700 metres. For Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine tonight. Rain and cold southerlies developing tomorrow morning. Snow to 400 metres, then easing to showers later in the day. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms clearing tomorrow. Otago and Southland, rain spreading north tonight, snow lowering to 500 metres overnight, then gradually clearing tomorrow. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods tonight, rain developing further tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The police have arrested the man wanted in relation to the theft of 2 police-issued Glocks from a patrol car in Gore, but one of the guns is still missing. The police say the handguns were taken from a police car yesterday after officers left the keys in the car and it was briefly stolen. Hori Gemmell was arrested late this afternoon and is in custody in Gore. Superintendent Paul Basham addressed media outside the Gore police station a short time ago.
Following inquiries this afternoon, a man was located at a property in the Te Tupua area of Southland, which is west of Matoda, around 3 p.m. This afternoon, and has been taken into custody. Officers are currently speaking to him, and we expect charges to be laid in due course. I can now also confirm that one of the police-issued Glocks stolen during the incident in Gore on Wednesday night has been recovered at the same Te Tupua property, as I say, west of Matoda. At this stage, the second Glock remains outstanding, and we remain very committed to its recovery.
He says some of the missing ammunition has also been recovered, but he would not say whether any bullets had been used. He urged anyone with information about the missing gun to come forward to the police.
From my perspective, and indeed from our perspective generally, the job's not finished, and our focus now remains on the safe recovery of the outstanding Glock. To that end, we encourage anybody who has information in regards to its whereabouts to come forward and to work cooperatively with police so that we can safely recover it. I should note, or would like to say, that anyone potentially involved in hiding or disposing of that firearm should know that we will continue to have a relentless focus on its recovery.
And that was Superintendent Paul Basham speaking in Gore a short time ago. The Pacific Islands Forum Summit ended in confusion last night with disagreement over the strength of commitments to combating climate change. The day-long leaders' retreat again highlighted the chasm between Australia and the region on climate as 18 leaders met on one of the most vulnerable places in the world. But as the leaders prepared to leave the forum, the talk about pushback from Australia and an apparent qualifier in the communique relating to climate change was being downplayed. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says not all leaders endorsed the statement from the small island states as referred to in the final communique because not all of them had seen it, as has happened in the past.
Last year, the text was negotiated that to acknowledge the strength of feeling behind the statement, but also the fact that not everyone was a part of it, it would be endorsed with qualification. The qualification being that not everyone negotiated or indeed had even seen the statement. That same language, I understand, has been put into the communique again this year.
She told reporters every leader had come to the forum with their own perspective and own domestic agenda. Jamie Tahana's in Tuvalu and filed this report.
The fact that we have a clear statement around the crisis that climate change represents for this.
One after the other, the 18 presidents, premiers and prime ministers of the Pacific arrived at the Whalakapule at the northern end of Funafuti, hoping to thrash out a deal to steer the region forward. It stretched well into the night, 12 hours in all, after discussions described by several people familiar as tense and at times combative. Vanuatu's Foreign Minister Ralph Regenvanu is one of them.
It was twice when it was like, okay, well, this isn't going to happen. This isn't going to be a joint declaration, and the meeting had to regroup to make sure that everyone stayed inside the tent. So I would say it was very fierce and very frank. And there were some people who just didn't want to move, and in the end, everyone had to move a bit.
In the end, leaders agreed to a communique and a separate statement on climate change. The main communique endorsed, with qualification, a declaration from the small island states declaring a climate crisis, calling for an immediate phase out of coal, a commitment to reducing emissions to 1.5 degrees, and the replenishment of the UN's Green Climate Fund. The small island states were hoping the full forum would endorse it, but not every country could agree. As expected, Australia didn't agree, but also New Zealand and Vanuatu, among others. Mr. Raglan explained.
We were being asked to endorse a statement we had not read. We have to bring the statement before the leaders, we have to see it, and then we have so that we can endorse it or not. But don't just say endorse something you don't see.
But Australia's stance on climate issues remains a bone of contention for the Pacific states, with the delegates telling RNZ Pacific that Australia mostly stood alone at the talks, which often got heated. However, Australia did back a separate climate change statement, which committed countries to combating it. And the words climate crisis were allowed to stay because, Mr. Raglan said, it referred to a crisis in small island states, not the whole Pacific. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison expressed his support.
Here in the Pacific in particular, and Pacific Island nation, the impact of climate change, the impact of rising sea levels, it's not a theory, it's real, it's happening to them right now and has been for some time. And so the actions and the directions that are set out in both of those documents, I think speak about our collective commitment to continue to address those issues.
Mr. Raglan described it as a remarkable concession.
Most of the key language we want to be included that has not been included in the past is now there.
However, Mr. Raglan said there were several red lines that Australia couldn't bring itself to back, including references to coal, announcing a net zero emission strategy by next year, and any target below 1.5 degrees. But for other countries, the communique was far from enough. The Prime Minister of Fiji, Frank Bainimarama, called it settling for the status quo, saying watered-down climate language has real consequences. Tuvalu's Prime Minister, Ineli Sopoaga, had hoped this forum would unite the region on climate change, that leaders would see the plight of this narrow slither of an atoll and commit to action. Sitting across the road watching the leaders retreat, beneath a tree in the breeze on the edge of the lagoon, sat 74-year-old Te Anga Esekia, a chief from the outer island of Vaitupu, who said he'd already seen dramatic change.
I am one of the farmers, so we plant the local plant called pulaka in a pit, which is dug down. I can see most of the pulaka pits are now...
They're not growing?
They are growing because if you taste the water there, it's salt.
And that was Tuvalu resident Te Anga Esekia, ending that story from Jamie Tahana. It is almost 16 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. An Invercargill Chinese restaurant has come under scrutiny after a box labelled pet food only chicken feet was spotted in its rubbish. But the restaurant says the feet aren't actually on the menu, even though they are delicious. Chen Liu looks at the rules around eating what many Chinese people see as a delicacy.
Chicken feet aren't uncommon in Chinese restaurants. They can be steamed, braised, pickled, and made into a cold dish with chili and vinegar. The diner in question is Hong Kong restaurant in Invercargill, where a box put out for recycling was spotted. It was labelled chicken feet seconds, as well as pet food only and not fit for human consumption. In a statement, Invercargill City Council says they visited the restaurant after a photo of the box was brought to their attention, and they were told the items were for personal use only.
Council staff reminded the operator that as per their food control plan, the only food that should be stored and prepared on site is food which is for sale to customers. This means they must ensure any food being delivered to their restaurant is intended for resale.
RNZ has spoken to Lisa Wang, who has been operating the buffet restaurant in Invercargill for 12 years. Her words have been translated.
We don't sell them, we don't provide them, we don't have them on our table. They aren't on our menu either. This is part of Chinese culture. We love it. Our seniors at home love it too, so they asked us to get some, and we ate some ourselves.
She says she doesn't understand why people are making a big fuss about it. Greg Lawrence, general manager at Vandenbrink Poultry, whose label is shown on the box, says they don't supply chicken feed to eateries directly, but to distributors.
Basically, we have two types, an A-grade chicken feed and B-grade chicken feed. Now, the A-grade chicken feed is fit for human consumption. The B-grade chicken feed, we downgrade that and we label that accordingly. It is not fit for human consumption and for pet food only.
Mr. Lawrence says the B-grade can be dirty, blemished and contain feathers.
There wouldn't be a food safety issue as such. It'd be a quality issue. You can imagine getting a mouthful of feathers wouldn't be ideal.
Mr. Lawrence also says there is a significant price difference between the two degrees. A New Zealand food safety spokesperson says pet food is not intended for humans to eat, and they can take enforcement action against the businesses if they sell it as food. But if people know the product is labelled unfit for human consumption and still choose to consume it in a private setting, then those Food Act rules do not apply. Mo te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Chen Liu tenei.
Comments by a Wellington City councillor that careless jaywalkers on the capital's Golden Mile might be the victims of natural selection has outraged some road safety campaigners. However, Brian Dawson is standing by his position that pedestrians need to take responsibility for their own safety. Hamish Cardwell reports.
Jaywalking. Everyone does it, and mostly we get away with it. However, in the 5 years to 2018, there have been more than 60 crashes involving pedestrians in Wellington's Golden Mile. That's the corridor stretching from Courtney Place through to Lambton Quay. At a council debate over the government's new road safety strategy this week, Councillor Brian Dawson criticised a colleague's claim that pedestrians should not be blamed for their own deaths and serious injuries. Mr. Dawson said pedestrians wearing headphones and on cell phones were the cause of many accidents. He said people stepping out onto a busy street without looking need to own their actions.
I can tell you, as someone who has experienced this for themselves, when a pedestrian wanders out in front of your bus with their headphones on, staring at their telephone, thinking that somehow that makes them invulnerable, well, it is Darwinian theory at work.
Walking advocate Andy Smith from Living Street's Aotearoa says Mr. Dawson's comments are insensitive and he should apologise.
He's a councillor. He looks after streets. He looks after footpaths. He shouldn't make a joke of it. He should actually try and repair this. It's not funny. It could have been one of his own family that gets run down. It's not a joke then, is it?
It really isn't a laughing matter. Transport agency statistics show that of the 64 crashes involving pedestrians on the Golden Mile between 2014 and 2018, 57 resulted in injuries, including 18 that were serious. Almost three-quarters were at least partly caused by pedestrians. Caroline Perry from road safety charity Break says Mr. Dawson's comments were re-traumatising to victims and families of people who have been hurt or killed on the road.
People make mistakes on roads, but they don't deserve to pay for it with their life. And for those families who've been bereaved in crashes, their life has been suddenly and horrifically torn apart. And so we need to be sensitive to the fact that they are grieving their loved one.
But Brian Dawson isn't backing down. He says while all accidents are tragic, it's not just pedestrians' lives that are ruined in a crash.
I drive buses. I've driven buses for more than 30 years. I can introduce you to bus drivers who have had to give up their livelihoods, who have had to go through extensive counselling because of the actions of the pedestrian that wandered blindly out in front of them. The point I was making yesterday, and the point that I will always continue to make, is that we all have to take responsibility for being sensible people.
In Wellington, it seems we're a city of jaywalkers. Do you jaywalk?
I sure do.
Yeah, I think I do.
I do run across the road.
I would describe myself as someone who crosses the road wherever he wants to.
A CBD shop employee on the Golden Mile has witnessed what happens when pedestrians don't take care. She was at work earlier this year when she heard a horrible sound.
Yeah, so we just heard a really loud noise and then some screams outside, so we went out to have a look what was going on.
And what did you see?
Just a person on the ground and everyone kind of came and circled around them. Looked like they just walked out to cross the road and weren't looking and collided with the end of the corner of a car.
She sees people constantly stepping out without looking and believes the speed limit should be reduced to 5 kilometres an hour and speed bumps installed. Alison Hess had a brush with disaster just today.
Actually, just on the way here to this park, I almost stepped in front of a bus, but pulled myself back. But if I had gotten hit, that would have been totally my fault.
What went through your mind when it happened?
You dumbass.
Sitting in the sun in downtown Wellington, Michael Bogatsky has a message for all road users, but particularly drivers.
Right now, everybody just needs to take a deep breath and be really considerate of each other. You're in a car, just slow down. What's the problem with adding 2 minutes because you're going through the CBD? Just slow down. Don't give the option to take away someone's mother or father or brother or sister.
The government is now considering public feedback on its road safety strategy, the Road to Zero. For Checkpoint, this is Hamish Cardwell.
Let us know what you think of that one. I'm sure you've got an opinion on it. Are you a serial jaywalker? Do pedestrians need to take more responsibility for their actions? I don't know about you, but do you womble across the road wearing your headphones, checking your smartphone, and are you guilty of not using the crosswalk? Probably have to say yes to a couple of those things. Does it all come down to impatience? Let me know what you reckon. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. While the All Blacks are fighting to keep the Bledisloe Cup, they might want to pick up a few pointers from the Black Ferns, who humbled their Aussie counterparts last weekend and are expected to do the same in the return test tomorrow night at Eden Park. One player who embodies the mental toughness of the New Zealand women is Auckland prop Alicia Pearl-Nelson, a proud Northlander with a love of rugby and horses. Severe injuries from the latter almost ended her playing career. Rugby reporter Joe Porter has more.
Alicia Pearl-Nelson was born and raised on a farm in Kaihu, just north of Dargaville. Her dad Peter says it was there that her love of horses bloomed.
Started from her wanting us to get her a horse when she was about 4. Gone from there to having 8 or 9 horses here.
And her love for rugby blossomed at the same time.
We used to take our son into morning J&B, and she seen these boys run around. She wanted to get in there and stamp the grass like everyone else.
At 13 years old, Nelson's passion for riding would almost cost her a leg.
I was riding around the paddock with my friend and we're having races in the paddock, and he cut me off and I had nowhere else to go but in between all this junk that was in the paddock. When my horse went through, it caught my leg on a metal beam and just ripped the side of my leg off.
And her dad says she was lucky more damage wasn't done.
When they did stitch it all up, the next morning we were there and they said, they've got to cut it all off. Like, that was a big piece of meat.
Multiple surgeries and skin grafts later, Nelson was determined to play on, despite being told her rugby days were over.
To hear that I wouldn't be able to play was pretty devastating, and obviously that was one of the drivers, because I just wanted to prove people wrong. That's the kind of child I was. If somebody said I couldn't do something, I was going to do it.
That attitude inherited from her namesake and grandmother Olga Pearl, a woman known for her toughness and tenacity.
I always get told when I'm grumpy or determined or anything like that I'm being like Olga, my nan.
Nelson, of Ngāti and Ngāpuhi descent, says her parents have always given her unwavering support. However, she had to ban her dad from her games after receiving too much unsolicited advice.
Yeah, I've toned that down quite a bit. It's not a case of wanting to, it's a case of having to.
Nelson made her Black Ferns debut in 2012, but another horse-related injury in 2016 nearly cut short her career.
Mum had told me to go and get the sheep in on my horse, and my horse slipped off a bank, and I put my arm out to stop us. So yeah, my arm was through my wrist, and I walked home with my dogs and my horse followed. Went straight up to the house and asked Dad if he could take me to the hospital. We left a note for my mum, and she was furious because the sheep weren't in.
The injury was so severe that doctors again told her that rugby was over. But the Black Ferns assistant coach, Wes Clark, says Nelson's toughness is second to none.
We often don't see the battles players fight behind the scenes. Just having someone like that who leads some of the younger players and actively tries to help them is huge for our environment.
The strain did get to Nelson. She considered quitting last year, but her aroha for the game is back.
Finally got my passion back, I think, because I was a lot fitter and I was enjoying the game, enjoying the company. I'm probably playing some of the best rugby I have in a long time, if not ever.
She's also passionate about helping young people. Nelson is a qualified nurse, following in her mum Kararaina's footsteps, and works in a sexual health clinic.
been in and out of hospital with all my injuries, being the one that's a vulnerable person and not having a voice. So to give a voice to those people who are vulnerable is really a privilege.
And while for now she's based in Auckland, the scrummaging cowgirl, or Kaihu Kopuai, dreams of one day returning to the farm.
Yeah, for sure. I drive home like nearly every weekend. It's like 3.5 hours one way.
She'll arrive home to a hero's welcome this weekend if she helps the Black Ferns beat Australia and seal a 2-0 series win. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Joe Porter aho.
Well, who would have known it? Bird calling is apparently back, at least in New South Wales. In the 50s and 60s, bird calling competitions were a big deal across the Tasman. And in the Bega Valley on the New South Wales south coast, school children are getting back into it. The BBC's Faya Cole reports.
This is the Bonda Bird Olympics. Clarity is key, so is enthusiasm and accuracy.
Don't mind, it's going to be loud.
Okay. That's the sound of an Australian bellbird. It's one of the entries into a friendly competition which mimics the sounds of native birds.
Oh, wait, no, that's not it.
These students live in the far south coast of New South Wales in the Bega Valley, where the noble art of bird calling is being revived.
What can you do?
A magpie.
All right, well, let's hear a magpie.
It's a local tradition which dates back to the 1950s and 60s, but it's only recently been brought back to life. These men are former bird calling school champions and now have the important job of mentoring the next generation.
Oh, well, I teach them about nature and that gets them out and about, hopefully out and about and get to see what's on around the real world instead of stuck in a groove,
That was a familiar cackle of the kookaburra, followed by a fan-tailed cuckoo. The winner automatically becomes a local hero. But no matter the outcome, they're all winners, and the birds think so too.
And that's Faya Cole with that report. And as you know, bird calls never went out of fashion on RNZ. Hey, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your company. Do go online and you can check out all our stories there. And our news team will be updating the news throughout the night. We'll see you next week. RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The lawyer for a family that successfully took earthquake insurer Southern Response to High Court says it's a shame Southern Response didn't admit earlier that it was in the wrong. A Southland man accused of stealing 2 police-issued Glock pistols is in custody, but one of the firearms is still missing. Police have launched a homicide inquiry after an Australian man died in a random shooting attack on a camper van in the early hours of this morning near Raglan. And lawyers are warning it won't be easy to block letters from prisoners with extremist views after the man held over the Christchurch mosque attacks sent 2 letters corrections say should have been blocked. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
The realistic chances of there being some military intervention in Hong Kong, honestly think it's a long way off that stage.
Lately with me, Karen Hay, is your late